Fika's night had spiraled into chaos. But just as she thought the humiliation couldn't get any worse, a deep, husky voice pierced through the air behind her. It was a voice she knew all too well. Her heart raced as another wave of emotions overwhelmed her. How could she have forgotten about him? Fika's headache only intensified. This was the last thing she needed right now. She would rather have her father intervene in this matter than Dike. At least she's comfortable with her father and used to his scoldings. With Dike, the uncertainty would just add to her anxiety. She dreaded what might come next. Would Dike be angry? Would he judge her, feel disappointed, or even report her to her father? A flood of questions filled her head, each one even more terrifying than the last. "What is going on here?" Dike asked as he walked over to stand beside Fika. His voice was calm but commanding, and his towering figure exuded authority. Fika couldn't bring herself to respond. She felt so small, so helpless in the face of everything happening. She lowered her gaze, her hands trembling slightly, unable to meet his eyes. Dike didn't push her to speak. Instead, his sharp gaze fell on the piece of paper she was holding. He gently took the bill from Fika and scanned through it. Her friends, who had been gearing up to leave, immediately recognized Dike. They had seen him several times before. Mr. Dewale's most trusted right-hand man and bodyguard. And like moths to a flame, they were suddenly drawn into him. Dike is one for the eyes for sure. He stands at an impressive height with his muscular frame a masterpiece of symmetry and power. He has this sculpted physique that commands attention. And his face is very attractive. It matches up with his stoic demeanor, very enigmatic with a sense of control that makes him all the more captivating. One of Fika's friends, the self-proclaimed leader of the group, put on a flirtatious smile. "You're Dike, right? Mr. Dewale's right-hand man?" she asked, her voice dripping with sweetness. Dike ignored her completely, his expression unreadable. Undeterred, she tried a different tactic. "Can you call your boss, please? Let him know that his daughter, Fika here, is in some trouble and needs urgent help," she said, her tone still sugary and coy. Fika wished she could just disappear. Her head hung even lower, her face flushed with embarrassment. She couldn't bear to see how Dike might react to this mess. Dike took his time to speak, his voice calm but firm. "Well, I can most definitely call my boss. But what is this problem that you speak of that I can't handle?" Dike asked. The lady felt much better. She had a victorious smile. At least he wasn't ignoring her now. She quickly regained her composure. "Are you sure you can handle it, Mr. Bodyguard?" she teased, her smile widening. Dike didn't respond to that. He simply waited, his gaze intense, urging her to explain herself. "Well," she began, "Fika here told us to order whatever we wanted. But now she says she can't pay for it because her cards are blocked. So unless you can handle the bills, you might need to call your boss," she explained with some concealed mockery, inwardly harboring the thought that he couldn't handle the bills anyway. The waiter, who had been nervously waiting for Fika to pay, was visibly shaken by the unfolding drama. He had thought it would be an easy transaction like always. He had no idea that he'd be pulled in such a drama. He honestly just wanted the bills paid so that he could live in peace. Fika felt her humiliation deepen. Her friends had thrown her into such a degrading situation, and now Dike had been dragged into it too, and it seemed like he would call her father to report everything. Dike was silent for a moment, his presence imposing as ever. Very striking and eye-catching, no one could tell what he was thinking. The girls had these victorious smiles for some reason, feeling all confident. Dike ignored them and suddenly approached the waiter, who practically started quaking under his gaze. "Don't worry about the bill," he spoke. "It will be taken care of," he assured. Fika's friends cheered, thinking Dike would now call Mr. Dewale, but what he said next shattered their expectations. "The bill will be paid by the rightful people who actually requested for and enjoyed the services," Dike affirmed. His tone left no room for argument. The mood shifted instantly. Fika's friends looked stunned, their smug expressions replaced with shock and anger. "What are you trying to say?" one of them snapped, her voice laced with irritation. Dike ignored her and turned back to the waiter to answer the question. "Do you know the people who ordered these items?" he asked, holding out the piece of paper. The waiter, now visibly nervous, shook his head. "Yes, sir," he stammered. "Do you know the people who consumed these items?" Dike asked again. "Yes, sir," he responded. "Is she one of them?" Dike asked, tilting and nodding his head towards Fika. "No, sir," the waiter replied, glancing at Fika, who had arrived long after the others. "Did she contact the hotel and vouch to pay for any bills today?" Dike pressed on, and the waiter desperately said no, with a negative shake of his head. How had he gotten himself in this situation? He seriously felt attacked. Then, is she obliged to pay for items she neither ordered nor consumed? Dike asked, his voice clear and firm. The waiter hesitated before answering, his tongue tied because of nervousness. "No, she's not obliged to, sir," he squeaked out. Dike nodded. "Good. Then the hotel can seek payment from the rightful people who made these orders and enjoyed the services. Here, hold your bill and hand it over to the correct persons this time," he said, and that completely sounded like a threat to the poor waiter. His fellow man was making him break out in cold sweat because of a few yes and no questions. The ladies could tell that the tables had turned, and it was not in their favor. One of the girls, desperate to regain control, frantically chimed in. "But Fika always pays. She told us to order whatever we wanted. Everyone here knows that. She's responsible for this," she accused. "Well, young lady, you and everyone who apparently knows are going to need to pull out some really convincing evidence. And by the way, you have every reason to be anxious. This isn't a good look for you at all." His words hit like a slap to their faces, their anger and embarrassment palpable. People in the restaurant began to take notice, their curious gazes adding to the tension. They had acted all high and mighty earlier when they had arrived, walking in like runway models, and audibly ordering the most expensive foreign cuisines on the menu, loud enough for everyone to hear. And now, not only couldn't they afford the bills, they were trying to force someone else to pay. "You're just a bodyguard," one of the women sneered, her voice rising. What do you know about how things work in places like this? She shouted, making sure all the onlookers heard her. Dike looked so regal and powerful, everyone thought he was some big shot. She just wanted to demean him and probably throw off the topic that was really doing a number on their image. Another friend joined in, her tone mocking. You probably can't even afford a single meal here. Stop acting all high and mighty. You're no one, she shouted. Dike didn't react to that at all. He just observed their petty, desperate measures like child play. They could try to demean him all they want. He had achieved his purpose for sure, and that's all that mattered. Fika, who had been silent all this time, slowly stood up. She had somehow managed to retrieve her voice and energy, thanks to obvious reasons. She looked directly at her so-called friends and spoke with determination. It's quite ironic, she began, that you'd mock someone else for not affording this hotel when we wouldn't even be in this situation if you could pay your own bills. Her friends stared at her, stunned. Fika never speaks that way to them. At least she hadn't before. Fika, are you seriously siding with him over us? We're your best friends, one exclaimed, her voice tinged with betrayal. Fika shook her head, her voice steady. Oh, really? Do you seriously believe that between you all and him, you are the ones being friends to me right now? She asked, and that silenced them. They were literally about to leave her all alone a few minutes ago. And by the way, Dike is my husband. We got married yesterday, Fika announced. Her friends were utterly shocked on hearing this. In fact, everyone who heard it was basically intrigued. Even the waiter had his own moment of doubt. Why would an innocent soul like Fika marry a terrifying man like this? He thought to himself. Fika took a deep breath, accompanied by a sigh of disappointment. I came here to share this massive change in my life with people I thought were my friends. But it seems like all you ever saw me as was a bag of cash. Now that it's empty, you're ready to toss it aside. She sounded really hurt. Without saying anything else, she turned and headed out of the restaurant. Dike, of course, walked out as well, with his calculated glides. He had nothing left to do here. The ladies were left behind, stunned, angry, and humiliated, with nothing but their hefty bill to face. Fika walked through the main entrance and headed straight for her bedroom. The house was quiet, but the silence only amplified the storm of emotions within her. She climbed onto the bed and curled herself on it. The soft seats did little to comfort her. The ride home had been as silent as the one to the hotel earlier, but this time it was a different kind of silence for her. She was still anxious, but the reasons for her anxiety had changed. Her mind replayed the events over and over, like a cruel film she couldn't turn off. The betrayal of her closest friends stung more deeply than she ever imagined. She had loved them dearly, treated them like family. For years, they were her sisters, her chosen family. She had trusted them with her heart, her secrets, and her life. Yet the moment they realized she was penniless, their true colors shone through, and their love for her vanished. The realization broke her in ways she couldn't even decipher. Fika thought of the countless times she had gone against her father for their sake. He had warned her again and again to distance herself from them. He saw something in them she couldn't or refused to see. But Fika had loved them too much. She had chosen them, defended them, and disobeyed her father to keep them close. Now, as she lay in the dark, their cruel words echoed in her mind. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing to cry. There was a part of her that hated herself for being so blind for so long, not seeing the truth sooner. Her father had tried to protect her, and she hadn't listened. Now she wished she had. But even as the pain from her friend's betrayal burned within her, there was another emotion she couldn't ignore. Gratitude. She thought of Dike, the man who had stood up for her when she couldn't find her own voice. He had stepped in and defended her when she was at her weakest. His words, his calm but firm presence, had lifted her when she felt she was sinking. She never expected that from him. Dike's actions caught her off guard. She felt embarrassed that he had seen her so helpless. But she was also incredibly thankful. She didn't know how to express what she felt. Words didn't seem enough. She wasn't really conversational with him anyways. So she decided she would show her gratitude through actions. The next day, Fika woke up really mentally exhausted. She found it really difficult to wake up. She had single-handedly disrupted her own slumber time by going out in the middle of the night to meet her so-called friends. Fika still wondered what would have happened if she somehow successfully snuck out of the house and somehow found her way to the hotel on her own last night. It would have been really nasty with no Dike around. This was her third day as a married woman, and so far, she hadn't done much to prove herself in this new life. Today, she wanted to change that. She decided she would clean the house and prepare lunch for them both. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Dike had left the house soon after they had breakfast. He would be back by noon though, so Fika thought it would be a nice gesture on her part. There wasn't much she could do anyways. The thought of cooking brought a small smile to her face. Cooking was something she had always enjoyed, though it had been years since she prepared a full meal on her own. Growing up, she was surrounded by plenty of house staff. Fika loved spending time with them. They weren't just employees to her, they were her friends. Right from childhood, she learned a lot from them. Her friends, however, that she met later in her life, never approved of this side of her. They looked down on the staff, calling them names as if they were less human. When Fika started spending more time in the kitchen or helping around the house, her friends would heavily discourage her, saying it was beneath her. Fika didn't agree with them, but eventually, she unknowingly gave into their influence. She stopped spending time with the staff and focused solely on her friends, going out with them or hosting them at her house. Now, as she stood in the kitchen, she realized just how much she had missed the simple joys of cooking. So she got to work. First, she tidied up the house. She swept the floors, dusted the furniture, and wiped down the surfaces. The house is small, so it didn't take much time. Next, she moved to the kitchen and familiarized herself with the place. There were enough ingredients for a decent meal, and she decided to make something simple yet hearty. She just hoped her average culinary skills had survived over the years. The aroma of food soon filled the air, and Fika felt a sense of pride. She hadn't done this in so long, but it felt good to create something with her own hands again. By the time noon rolled around, the table was set and the meal was ready. All Fika needed to do now was to wait for Dike. She was nervous about what he would think, but she was also hopeful. This was her way of saying thank you and showing his kindness yesterday hadn't gone unnoticed. She wiped her hands on a towel and glanced at the clock. Dike would be home any minute now. Fika set the plates on the table, her hands trembling slightly. She had prepared this meal with care, and she honestly enjoyed the process. Now she just hoped Dike would like it too. As she sat down across from Dike, she watched him closely. This was the first time she had ever cooked for him, and her stomach churned with nerves. She folded her hands in her lap, trying to appear calm, but her heart raced as Dike picked up his fork and took the first bite. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on him, waiting for some kind of reaction, a nod, a smile, even a slight change in expression. But there was nothing. Dike just chewed quietly, his face as still as ever. He didn't even glance at her or say a word. He just continued eating like it was any other meal. Fika felt her shoulders slump a little. What had she been expecting? A compliment? Dike wasn't exactly that kind of person, and his face gave away nothing, always rigid like a stone wall. Still, she couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. After several bites, she gave up on hoping for a reaction out of him. At least he's eating it, she thought, trying to console herself. If he didn't like it, he wouldn't eat it. That was enough proof for her that her hard work hadn't gone completely to waste. Taking a deep breath, Fika picked up her own fork and decided it was time to eat too. She scooped up a small bite, brought it to her mouth, and just then, her eyes widened as her taste buds were hit with an explosion of fire. It felt as if a volcano had erupted in her mouth, spreading molten lava across her tongue. Her throat burned, her face flushed, and tears welled up in her eyes almost instantly. She gasped, frantically looking around for relief. Through her blurry, teary-filled vision, she saw a glass of milk being placed in front of her. Without a second thought, she grabbed it and drank deeply. The cool liquid soothed the fire in her mouth, but it wasn't enough. She took another gulp and then another until she finally felt the flames subside a little. Breathing heavily, she set the glass down and wiped her eyes. It was only then she realized Dike was still eating. He sat there, calm and bothered, continuing to chew as though the food didn't taste like pure chili. Fika stared at him in disbelief. How was he doing that? Just one bite had nearly ended her life, and yet there he was, eating like it was nothing. Her gaze shifted to the empty glass of milk. When had he gotten up to pour it? She hadn't even noticed him move. But somehow he had known she would need it and acted before she even asked. It was clear. Dike had tasted the food and realized just how abnormally spicy it was. He must have known she wouldn't be able to handle it, yet he didn't stop her. He just waited for the right time to get a glass of milk. Fika's face burned with embarrassment. She had wanted to do something kind for Dike, to thank him for defending her when she was at her lowest. She had put her heart into making this meal, and it turned out horribly. Dike kept eating without a word, sparing her the humiliation of acknowledging the disaster she had created. She couldn't bear to sit there any longer. If she stayed, she was sure her embarrassment would swallow her whole. She stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the floor, and muttered something about needing to check something in the bedroom. Without waiting for a response, she rushed to the bedroom. Once inside the bedroom, Fika shut the door behind her and leaned against it, her cheeks still burning. She covered her face with her hands, wishing she could just disappear. She had wanted to make Dike happy, but instead she had embarrassed herself beyond belief. Her mind raced with questions. How had the food turned out so spicy? She had been careful while cooking, or so she thought. Maybe she had added too much pepper without realizing it. Whatever the reason, she couldn't believe she had managed to create such a disaster. And Dike, how was he eating that food without flinching? Did he not taste the heat? Or was he simply too polite to say anything? Fika felt a pang of guilt as she remembered the way he had handed her the milk. He must have known how bad the food was, but he hadn't criticized her or even hinted at it. Her embarrassment deepened as she thought about his calm demeanor. Dike's actions weren't just kind, they were thoughtful. He had spared her feelings, even when he had every reason to complain. I just wanted to do something nice for him, she whispered to herself. And I messed it up, she thought. Dike finished every single bite of the food Fika had served him. Every scoop carried the overwhelming spice that had made Fika retreat to the bedroom in embarrassment. But Dike ate it without hesitation. It was the first meal his wife had ever prepared for him, and for that alone, it deserved respect. The thought and effort invested in preparing it held more value than its taste to him. When he was done, Dike leaned back in his chair for a moment, his thoughts wandering off. It was years ago, when Dike had just started working for Mr. Adewale. He was a fresh-faced young man then, eager to prove himself. The agency had just sent him to work as a driver and bodyguard to a man of so much stature. But Mr. Adewale was his very first employer, so he was really just new to this kind of job and was set to do his very best. One afternoon, as he drove his boss home from work, Mr. Adewale mentioned they needed to pick up his daughter. Take the next turn, Mr. Adewale instructed, guiding him to a part of the city that Dike hadn't expected. The narrow streets were bustling with activity, filled with market stalls, noisy children, and modest homes. This was one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, an area Dike was familiar with, but it surprised him that someone like Mr. Adewale would have his daughter here. Are you sure this is the place, sir? Dike asked hesitantly. Yes, Mr. Adewale said firmly, his gaze scanning the surroundings as if they were perfectly normal. As he pulled up at the location he directed, he still couldn't fathom how Mr. Adewale's daughter could be in these slum settlements. He was looking around, trying to get a sense of it, when his eyes landed on a lady, the most beautiful young lady he had ever seen. She stood in the middle of a small group of children. Her smile was radiant, lighting up the drab surroundings like a beam of sunlight. She didn't look like she belonged here. Her polished appearance stood in stark contrast to the worn-down streets, but the way she interacted with the people told a different story. Her presence was warm and genuine, and the people around her responded to it nicely. The children clung to her, their eyes filled with adoration. She wasn't just beautiful, she had an aura of grace that couldn't be ignored. It was her kindness that struck him most. She treated everyone with respect and affection, no matter their station in life. Dike couldn't take his eyes off her. He forgot where he was and why he was there. All he knew was that he was looking at the most incredible person he had ever seen. Let's go, Mr. Adewale said, snapping him out of his daze. Dike quickly got out of the car to open the door for his boss, but his gaze kept drifting back to the lady. She waved goodbye to the children, her laughter still ringing in the air, and walked over to them. Good afternoon, Papa, she greeted her father with a warm hug. She then turned to Dike and offered him a polite smile. Good afternoon, she said softly. Dike managed to give a nod, his heart pounding. Thank goodness he had always had an impeccable emotional control. She is the daughter of a wealthy man. his boss, and he was just a driver and bodyguard, basically on probation that time. They lived in two entirely different worlds, and he knew his place. He did everything possible to avoid Fika in all ways over the years. It wasn't really hard since she stayed clear of him willingly. She was close with every other staff in her father's house but him. Over the years, Dike had silently admired Fika from a distance. Mr. Dewale played a big part in that as well, since he'd randomly sent him to follow Fika around, especially on her night escapades with her friends, just to keep an eye on her and make sure she is safe. So, for years of following Fika around, he had seen how her friends took advantage of her generosity. But there was nothing he could do. He wasn't in the position to intervene. He was to be a silent observer. So that day, when Mr. Dewale asked him to marry Fika, it had taken every ounce of self-control to appear calm. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was an offer he had never dared to dream of, yet his male ego wouldn't allow him sound as if he was being dashed a favor. He didn't want to seem desperate and be undermined as a son-in-law controlled by a wealthy father-in-law. Saying no that day was one of the hardest things he had ever had to do. But he knew Mr. Dewale so well. Watching him converse with people over the years had gave him a great understanding of Mr. Dewale. He knew exactly how to bait him and turn the tables in his favor. And that worked great for him. Now, Fika is his wife, and today she just prepared chili sauce for him. That is surely a lot of progress. Fika was still closed off in the bedroom, consumed by embarrassment and the lingering burn of pepper in her tongue as a reminder of the disaster she had cooked up. She had a knock on the door and honestly wished she could disappear into thin air. The person knocking the door was obvious. Only the two of them lived in this house, and Fika honestly didn't want to see him right now. But she couldn't avoid him either. She slowly opened the door, holding her head low, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Dike didn't say anything. He understood her dilemma. He just stretched out a plate of food to her. Fika looked at the plate in his hands, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. Fika hesitated for a moment before taking the plate from him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dike nodded. "And thank you too, for cleaning the house and preparing the meal. I know you put a lot of effort into it." At the mention of the meal, Fika's face turned crimson. She quickly fumbled and closed the door, unable to face him any longer. As she sat down to eat, Fika was surprised by how delicious the food was. Dike had made one of her favorite dishes, and it tasted perfect. And most importantly, there were no volcanoes in her mouth. This was so considerate of him, and it really warmed her heart. She came to acknowledge that she obviously lagged off over the years and she needed to work on her culinary skills. And most definitely stop acting righteous. She'd have to taste every food before serving it henceforth. In the days that followed, Fika threw herself into learning how to cook better. She spent hours watching cooking videos online and experimenting with recipes in the kitchen. Slowly but surely, she began to improve. At one of their meal times, which was basically the only time they got to sit together, Dike mentioned that they'd go visit his family one of these days. His parents and siblings had been informed and they were waiting. Fika didn't know how to react to that. She surely loved meeting new people, but the thought of meeting her in-laws was daunting. She wasn't sure how they would receive her, and the uncertainty made her a little uneasy. One morning, Fika informed Dike that she wanted to take a walk to the market and buy just a few things. It would be more of an exploration. She didn't need to buy anything for the house. They'd be gone for some time, so they didn't need to stock the house. Dike offered to drive her, but she insisted on going alone. She wanted to explore the local market and familiarize herself with her new area. At the market, Fika felt a rush of excitement. The vibrant colors of fruits and vegetables, the chatter of vendors calling out their wares, and the earthy smell of spices and freshly baked goods. She loved the energy of the local markets, where everything felt alive and real. It was an adventure, and she enjoyed every moment of it. When Fika returned home, she noticed that Dike's car was no longer parked outside. She frowned, wondering where he might have gone. He had mentioned earlier that he wouldn't be going anywhere today. As she approached the house, she realized she didn't have the keys. She sighed, thinking about how she would wait for Dike to return. But then, she heard some sounds coming from inside the house. The sounds were faint, but all too familiar. She stepped closer, trying to make them out and be sure. She opened the door, and her suspicions were confirmed. Her friends were all sitting in her small living room. They had made themselves comfortable, lounging as if they owned the place. Their loud chatter filled the air, creating a chaotic buzz that overwhelmed the quiet space. When they noticed Fika standing at the door, their faces lit up with excitement. They greeted her warmly, their voices suddenly full of enthusiasm. But Fika was confused. Why were they here? How had they even found this place? After Fika and Dike had left the hotel that night, the hotel management of course did their job without delay. They had offered services and they needed their payments for it. The girls of course couldn't come up with the pay fast enough. The situation had escalated and they ended up spending the night in a cell, even after they offered all the expensive jewelry and gadgets on them as leverage. It seemed like the hotel had their own agenda. It had taken ages to scrape together the money to pay off the expenses. It involved countless humiliating phone calls, ones they had refused to make earlier when Fika suggested so. The whole ordeal had been embarrassing for them. Initially, they were furious with Fika and Dike, but as they sat in that prison cell, their anger faded into a moment of clarity. They realized that despite their situation, Fika had done so much for them. She had pulled them out of poverty and given them a taste of life they'd never imagined. Because of her, they had traveled, experienced wealth, and enjoyed luxuries they might never have known. Even though Fika was broke now, they knew it was momentary. She was still the daughter of a billionaire, an only child with untapped potential. They concluded that her father had likely interfered, trying to separate her from them because he didn't approve of her friendship with them. They've always known that losing Fika would mean losing access to the exotic lifestyle they had gotten used to. So they decided to mend things with her immediately. Using their charm, they tracked down some of Dike's acquaintances and convinced them to share his address. That's how they found themselves here today. As they spoke to Fika, their apologies poured out. They admitted they had treated her poorly and they said they had come to make peace. They deeply regretted not giving her a chance to explain herself. They said they wished they could have been a part of her legal marriage, saying they would have celebrated the moment if only they had known. Still, they expressed their happiness for her and wanted to move forward. Fika studied their faces, trying to gauge their sincerity. They seemed honest, and their words felt genuine. Her heart softened as she thought of the years of friendship they had shared and the countless memories they had made together. Touched by their efforts, Fika smiled and told them that she held no grudge. She apologized too, saying she was sorry things had turned out the way they did. They forgave each other, and their usual friendship conversations started off. As Fika sat with her friends, their conversations began to shift. At first, they were chatting casually, but soon their words became unpleasant. They started making comments about her house, calling it too small and saying she deserved a better one in a nicer neighborhood. Then they brought up her husband, questioning how he could let her go to a local market. "You're a rich girl," one of them said. "You should be served by others, not doing things meant for servants." They kept talking as if they were defending Fika, pointing out all the injustices against her, but their words felt wrong. They blamed her father for making her marry a bodyguard, calling it a mistake. Then they accused Dike, saying he must have convinced her father to force this marriage on her for his own gain. They went on pointing Dike as someone who only cared about her wealth. The irony wasn't lost on Fika. They were basically describing themselves. The more they spoke, the more clarity Fika got. She couldn't believe the things they were saying about her own father and Dike. They were just throwing accusations about in the name of care and friendship. Her father had always wanted what was best for her, and Dike wasn't the kind of man they were accusing him of being. She had known him for years. That guy had never made any move on her. She knows for sure this whole arrangement was her father's plan. Had she been this blind to their manipulation all this while? Now, as she thought about it, something else bothered her. She had left Dike at home earlier, and he had told her he wouldn't be going anywhere today. Yet here they were in her house, and Dike was nowhere to be seen. Someone obviously let them in. "Where is Dike?" she thought. Interrupting their chatter, Fika's voice cut through their noise. "Where is Dike?" she asked firmly. "Who let you guys in?" Her friend stopped, surprised by her tone. They glanced at each other, sensing the change in her mood. Uh, we found him here," one of them said. "He let us in and said we could wait for you. Then he went out. We just missed you so much and decided to wait." Fika frowned, her heart sinking. "Why did he leave? What did you say to him?" she pressed. They had insulted him to her face days back in the hotel, so it wasn't something they couldn't repeat. She knew Dike to some extent. He wasn't someone who would leave without a reason. She had a strong feeling they had said something or done something to him. "Fika, what's wrong with you?" one of them snapped defensively. "Why are you making it sound like we did something to him?" she asked. "Yes, Fika," another chimed in. "We're your real friends. Are you seriously going to take the side of a forced marriage over our side? Why are you even asking us these questions?" They were trying to guilt trip her, as they had done so many times before. But this time, something inside Fika had changed. She could see through their words now. She finally understood how they had been using her for so long, hiding their selfish acts behind fake smiles and kind words, masking manipulation with love and seeking pity. Well, not anymore. Taking a deep breath, Fika looked at them firmly. "Girls, I value the years of our friendship. I'm grateful for the memories. But as you can see, I have started a new chapter in my life, and I want to focus on it. You're not my enemies, but I need space to grow. So I will politely ask you girls to be on your way. I need to start cooking for my husband. Her words were steady, her determination clear. Her friends stared at her, shocked and silent. They weren't used to this side of Fika. That was a real challenge against them. She was basically telling them that their opinions weren't necessary this time around by acknowledging her husband just seconds after they degraded him. Fika's friends exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to say. Dike had indeed led them into the house, but he left shortly after the little seductress tried to pull her tricks on him once again. Dike, unwilling to be part of their drama, walked out. He wanted Fika to deal with her friends on her own accord. Chasing them away and forcing them out of her life would not work. That is the method her father had used for years without any good result. Mr. Dewale constantly telling Fika her friends were a bad influence on her and she should avoid them only made her pity them and get protective over them. Sometimes you need to give room for someone to discover facts for their own selves. He knows how manipulative and calculative these girls are. He didn't want to stick around with fears of losing his temper and giving them a reason to fill Fika's innocent mind with ideas about him. He was already a big, bad giant in Fika's eyes. He didn't want anything to fuel that thought of him in her. Fika, are you kicking us out of your house? Really? One of them asked, her tone sharp. Fika sighed, her voice calm but firm. Listen, there comes a time when we all have to focus on what really matters. Priorities change and we grow. I hope one day you'll understand, but for now, I need you all to leave. The ladies exchanged looks again. Fika's wealth had always been their true interest. They were almost losing it, and they were not ready for that. Fika, is this about what happened at the hotel? We already apologized, and you said you forgave us. One friend pressured, her voice soft and pleading. I did forgive you, Fika replied evenly. That's in the past, I've forgotten about it. But as I said, I am starting a new chapter in my life, and I need to make some changes. I don't want to disappoint my father again. Her words struck a nerve. One of the ladies coughed. So this is about your father, the man who has always hated us because he thinks we're only friends with you for your money? Exactly, another chimed in. If we were here for your money, Fika, do you think we'd still be around when you have nothing? Fika chuckled, the sarcasm in her voice cutting. Oh, please. What do you mean by I have nothing? You all know that I am still the daughter of a billionaire, and you clearly still hope I am as naive as before. Her tone grew cold. I've tried to be polite, but it's clearly not working. Please, get up and leave my house, she ordered. She walked to the door, opening it wide and motioning for them to leave. The women hesitated, their expressions turned dark. The pretense of friendship was gone, replaced by cold hostility. So, you've grown wings now, because of this shabby little house and your pauper of a husband. One sneered, and the rest laughed at this. Fika smiled faintly, unfazed by her taunts. You're only making this easier for me, and I really appreciate that. Get out of my house, she ordered once again. The finality in her voice left no room for argument. The women stormed out, glaring back at her. Fika watched them leave, then slammed the door behind them with a loud bang. Relief washed over her. She didn't even know where she had found the courage, but it felt good. They had manipulated her for so long. How had she not seen through their facade? She shook her head at her own naivety. Her thoughts shifted to Dike. She worried about what her friends might have said to him. Their words could be cruel and cutting, and now she didn't even know where he was or when he'd return. The most embarrassing part, she didn't even have his phone number, despite all these years of living together under the same roof. She just hoped he would come back soon. Dike drove aimlessly around the city for some time before stopping at a nearby bar. The hours stretched on as Dike avoided going home. He worried about what might await him there. Maybe Fika's friends were still monopolizing the house, or perhaps they had convinced her to live with them. He couldn't think of any scenario that would end well. Eventually, Dike decided to return home. It was late when he arrived. The lights were on, but the place was eerily quiet. He stepped inside cautiously, unsure of what he might find. To his surprise, Fika was in the small kitchen, moving about as she worked on something, probably dinner. She greeted him with a warm smile, and that only deepened his confusion. Dike glanced around, trying to figure out if her friends were still there. "You're just in time," Fika said as she set the table. "Dinner is ready." Dike sat down, still trying to make sense of her cheerful demeanor. It wasn't what he had expected. Could she be trying to butter him up or something? Maybe she wants to go out again tonight? He decided to test the waters. "Your friends dropped by earlier. Did you meet them?" he asked casually, though their conversations were barely ever casual. "Oh yes, we met and we spoke. They left and they're never coming back." Her response stunned him. He stared at her, suspicious but unwilling to press further. Dinner was mostly silent, as usual, until Fika broke it. "So, what time do we leave tomorrow?" she asked. Dike frowned slightly, confused, so Fika elaborated. "To your village, to meet your family, remember?" she clarified. Surprised she had to remind him. Wasn't he the one who said they'd go tomorrow? Dike studied her, still unsure of her intentions. "You still want to go?" he asked. "Why wouldn't I?" she replied, sounding genuine. "I already packed my bag. Are we not going anymore?" Dike was taken aback. He had assumed her friend's visit would have changed her mind. He thought they might have talked her out of it. After a pause, he said, "It's a 6-hour ride from here. We'll leave in the morning." Fika nodded in agreement, and they went back to eating. That night, Fika lay awake, unable to sleep. While she kept up a calm front, her emotions were in a turmoil. Surprisingly, she didn't feel upset about cutting ties with her friends. Instead, it felt rather satisfying, almost liberating. What weighed on her was her father. She missed him deeply and replayed countless times the moments when he had lovingly advised her to let go of those unproductive friendships. He had tried so hard over the years, but she hadn't listened. Now, guilt overwhelmed her, imagining the stress she had put him through. Her father had always wanted her to take her career seriously, to find purpose and direction. Fika wanted to make things right with him, to see him proud of her. She imagined how happy he'd be if she got a job. But the thought of a corporate career left her feeling empty. She hated the idea of working in an office, sitting at a desk all day, staring at a screen, attending meetings. It all seemed so dull and lifeless. It wasn't what she wanted. She craved something adventurous and exciting, something that brought her real joy. But for now, she resolved to put her happiness aside. She wanted to be productive, to earn her father's trust back. If she could secure a job and prove herself, perhaps her father would welcome her back to the company. She also wanted to help Dike with the house expenses. Relying on him entirely wasn't fair, especially since neither of them had a job at the moment. As these thoughts swirled in her mind, another layer of anxiety crept in. Tomorrow, she'd meet Dike's family. She didn't know how they would feel about her, and the idea of being in a car with him for 6 hours only added to her nerves. At least in this house, she had the bedroom all to herself, but in the car, they'd be side by side the entire time. To calm herself, Fika decided she'd focus on sightseeing during the journey. She loved looking out of moving cars, watching the world pass by. It always gave her a sense of peace. Maybe that would help her get through the long ride tomorrow. Fika's mind was overwhelmed with thoughts and sleep felt impossible. She managed to drift off briefly, but her anxiety woke her up again. As she lay there, she heard a faint sound, like water dripping on the floor. It was the sound of the shower running. Turning her head toward the bathroom, she noticed the lights were on. Her eyes were fixated on the door, and for some reason, she couldn't look away. A moment later, the shower stopped. Her attention on the door only grew stronger. Anticipation built in her for reasons she could not explain. The bathroom lights clicked off and the door was opened. At that exact moment, the moonlight seemed to shine brighter, illuminating the room. Stepping out was a tall, muscular Dike with his upper frame on display to her seeking eyes. His bare chest glistened with droplets of water. The moonlight highlighted every detail, his well-defined abs and the strength in his frame. The sight held Fika's gaze, and she couldn't look away. Dike quietly moved toward the closet and pulled out a few items, some blankets, clothes, and a large backpack. Without turning on the lights, he began stuffing his things into the bag. Fika couldn't understand how he was finding everything in the dark. She had barely noticed his belongings in this room before, and she had almost forgotten it was a shared space. Shamelessly, she kept stealing glances at Dike's broad frame as he moved about, methodically gathering his things. Once he was done, he carefully closed the closet and walked toward the door. Every action was deliberate, as if he was trying not to make any noise. Fika assumed he thought she was asleep and didn't want to wake her. But his words as he reached the door shattered that assumption. "Get some rest. It's a long trip tomorrow," he said, before gently closing the door behind him. Fika froze, her face burning with embarrassment. She felt like a deer caught in headlights. How did he know she was awake? She hadn't moved a muscle, only her eyes followed him around. How in the world did he figure it out? As her thoughts wandered, she started piecing things together. Why had Dike chosen to bathe so late in the night? It suddenly made sense. This house only has one bathroom, and it was the one attached to the bedroom she had claimed as her own. Fika realized just how selfish she had been. She had basically monopolized the whole room, treating it as her sanctuary. And she hadn't made it easy for Dike either. Just days ago, she had openly called him a big, terrifying giant, and said other hurtful things about him. No wonder he was sneaking around at night. He most definitely doesn't want her getting uncomfortable with his presence. Fika felt a pang of guilt. All this while, she had been acting like the victim of a giant, yet she herself had become a micro-bully. The next morning, Fika and Dike were both ready to leave. Dike had already loaded their bags in the car. They were now having breakfast before setting off. Fika did her best to act normal, pretending she hadn't been caught spying on him the night before. Thankfully, Dike didn't bring it up either. Once they were done with breakfast, they cleared out and the journey began. Fika had no idea where they were going, but the uncertainty only added to the thrill of the adventure. One thing she knows for sure, though, is that once she returns to the city, she is going to turn her life around.